Morning all. Welcome to the Splunk Future Advisory series in conjunction with Obscure. Once again, we have Herman Singh here as our facilitator, and then our panel, we're very excited to have Samantha Rule from 91 and Timiling McCarthy from Standard Bank with us as our panelists. So this is the third in the series. The topic we'll be talking about today would be around collaboration in the security space. So we look forward to an interactive discussion. As per normal, please feel free to post your questions in the chat or raise your hand if you have got a Q&A, and we'll address them. So without further ado, let's go to the main agenda with Herman. Thanks, Herman.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome to our guests, Sam and Tumi, and welcome to the audience. It's great that you joined us. We're very pleased to have you here, and it's a very exciting webinar that we have for you today. As Paul's mentioned, it's about follow the money, follow the data, which is the overall theme. And today we're going to talk about why collaboration and collaborative security are so critical for the data-driven enterprise. Folks, you know who I am. I'm not going to go through an introduction into me. And you know that a lot of the content that we talk about came out of the book Diverlution, Amazon bestseller. Get it if you need more information. So folks, to remind you, we really look forward to interactions with you. It's really powerful if the audience can post questions. We've had such lovely interactions in the last two webinars that we've run. So please just keep your questions coming. And as we go to the panel, I'll make sure that I pose your questions. What we're going to talk about today is really, I'll give you a quick introduction into why collaboration is important and what the case for collaboration is. And I'm going to run a little bit of a high-level case study into an example of where collaboration should have worked, didn't work, and it caused enormous trillions of dollars of damage because we didn't collaborate. And we'll talk about this new age of risk, especially in the security space. And then we'll talk, I'll run a small case study on two security events. One was Meltdown, the other Spectre. And we'll talk about the role that collaboration played. I'll then wrap up by looking at some lessons and some best practices, and then we'll go to the panel. So we're living in a knowledge-based world that's highly tightly coupled, highly complex, multiple levels of operations. We've got applications, networks, data layers, infrastructure layers, lots of vulnerabilities everywhere, multi-regional. In today's very, very complex world, we are no longer, working in a field, passing pineapples to each other. The most important skill today in terms of collaboration is intellectual collaboration, operating as a team. The fact of the matter is we've always worked as teams. Collaboration has been critical to the survival of the human race. It's what led to the rise of humans. It's what led to speech, in fact, because without speech, we couldn't collaborate. So I mean, many people don't realize that's why our brains are so big. It's about managing communication between many, many people. And the reason that this is critical in a knowledge-based economy is knowledge-based economy is all about ideas, and it's about being smart. And in a knowledge economy and in any team, in fact, none of us is as smart as all of us. So really what you want to do is to find a way to harness the combined intellect and combined power of teams and groups of people in a company, and increasingly outside of the company in ecosystems around you. So collaboration is when two or more people work towards a common goal, which should seem natural, but actually it's not natural for people to do that. And it's even less natural in the security space, because the security space is very closed and very secretive. And in fact, if anything, it's probably the least collaborative industry generally. If you look at the way we work around software development, building ecosystems, commerce, I sit on the Payment Association of South Africa that is highly collaborative. We basically have multiple organizations that collaborate, and in fact, security, unfortunately, is very much a silo-based organization and industry. Here's an example of what happens if you have a very silo-based approach, and it's really a very sad case study on the COVID pandemic. Right? This is what happens if you don't collaborate. COVID is the virus, right? It can't move. COVID can't move unless we move, right? And so it can't get to the next person. All that COVID wants to do is replicate itself, like any software virus. And COVID doesn't care about our silos, and it doesn't care about how society has nations. It doesn't care about planes and handshakes. COVID doesn't care about any of these things. Right? COVID just wants to replicate itself. The fact is actually a pandemic and community health is a lot like security in the IT world, because community health is a common good, right? We all either healthy together or we all sick together. We're all either safe together or we all either secure together. And in fact, generally, you don't want to compete on security in the same way that you don't want to compete on health. And actually, the only way to get the pandemic under control and the only way to get security under control is if we cooperate and collaborate. Now, look at the way we reacted to COVID. We are now day 600 of the battle against COVID, and there was a land grab. We started hoarding ventilators per country, PPE per country. We hoarded vaccines per country. There was resistance. We had COVID skeptics, vaccine skeptics, anti-maskers, ivermectin users. I mean, we went off in different directions. It became very parochial, right? We had multiple national lockdowns. Every country went into lockdown differently, varying severities. And I've just flown overseas. Every country has now got a fragmented vaccine passport approach, and travel internationally is a nightmare because every country's got different quarantine regulations. The consequence of this is that the variant keeps evolving. We've got a delayed resolution, and now we've got greater polarization and greater politicization and weaponization of what actually should have been a 28-day lockdown. Had the entire world gone into a 28-day lockdown where everyone had synchronized the lockdown at the same time, the virus would have died. Right? So in other words, but it required that governments, regulators, businesses, citizens, medical services, logistics players, and pharmaceutical companies all played nicely together, which we couldn't do. And that is a very key kind of example of what happens if you don't collaborate. And so cyber criminals like COVID, they're not constrained by organizational silos. They're not constrained by boundaries between organizations, and they exploit the cracks in the silos that do exist. I remember when I was running IT security for a major institution, we had all of our hacks on a Friday afternoon, and the reason was everyone knew if it was a long weekend, the IT security team was off at 12 o'clock, and the time to launch a hack was at like 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then all of a sudden, out of Belarus and Kiev, we were getting all of these hacks into the system. And people go, well, I'm not respecting the fact that you have a weekend because we don't have a clock over here. So the problem is this decades-long cyber pandemic that we've had has now just keeps developing more and more lethal security variants of concern. And what you've got is rising complexity and rising sophistication, which is very similar to COVID, right? The virus just keeps getting more and more sophisticated and more complex, and that's driving the need for multifunctional approaches. So today, if you want to deal with these increasingly hostile attacks, you really have to be working together because no single company on their own could fix this. Here's some of the stats. The stats are horrendous. You've probably seen them. There's lots of sources of these stats, but 2 out of 3 small and medium-sized enterprises go out of business within 6 months of a cyber attack. There's 4,000 ransomware attacks per day, and there's been a 67% increase in the number of breaches in the last five years. Traditional antivirus software is only effective against 43% of these attacks. I mean, the numbers are scary. The number of suspicious apps that are being deleted, the number of companies getting hacked every second, the cost to the world, the fact that the average ransomware demand is skyrocketing, and the fact that 41% of companies have loose ends in their data protection system. I mean, this is telling you that we've got serious challenges, and this trend, unfortunately, is moving one way. The range of risks is very broad. Although Office is probably the most attacked piece of software around, your browser, Android, even Adobe tends to get attacked as well. And if you look at where the attacks are coming from, well, phishing attempts and denial of service, distributed denial of service attacks, obviously quite high, but video conferencing attacks have been increasing as well as exploiting exposed services. And so, you've got this enormous increase in attacks into companies. So I want to give you a quick case study into one security incident to just kind of drill a little bit deeper into what really works well in this industry and take out some key lessons for how collaborative security is probably the future of security into the future. The case study is really around around how open source is about collaboration, but actually too much of the world is actually closed. And it's an increasingly open world, but too much is closed. And secrecy, oddly enough, is our default setting. That's how we normally operate in the security world. So the breach I'm going to talk about is a breach that actually was actually started being distributed in 1995, and for over 20 years nobody realized that this security breach existed. There was actually a flaw. And the first flaw was called Spectre, and the second was called Meltdown. And both of these flaws related to problems that were actually built into the chipset. And they were actually a vulnerability where if somebody exploited the flaw, they could actually take control of your computer, and it was actually built into the CPU. So it was a hardware flaw that actually you can't solve a hardware flaw over the air. You can't email someone a patch for a hardware, so you can't fix hardware. You got to send them a software patch. So how did we discover this? Well, actually, it was a number of researchers at university that actually picked this up 20 years after, right? Billions of CPUs had been distributed for laptops and phones and servers. And so we suddenly realized that billions of devices around the world were actually vulnerable. There were no exploitations. So luckily for us, there wasn't an exploitation that led to this. And so between July 2017 and January 2018, nobody said anything. The industry had to double down and start fixing this. So this flaw was discovered by collaboration between private and public sectors, between Google and a number of other companies that were involved in this space, software companies, security companies. And then for 6 months, the entire industry worked on fixing this. What type of vulnerability was this? Well, Meltdown specifically attacked Intel and Apple. And the attack vector was to execute code on the system. And there was an exploit path in kernel memory. The only remediation was a software patch. Spectre, similarly with Intel, Apple, but also with ARM and AMD, had a similar problem. And similarly, the exploit path was around reading memory contents from other applications. And also, the only way to fix this was with a software patch. So in other words, pretty much every process in the world had the same vulnerability. And the significance of this is that these vulnerabilities are not tied to a specific operating system, like some critical vulnerabilities are. They take advantage of this performance boosting feature, which is called speculative execution or caching. And everyone uses caching or caching. So these features, as I said, have been built in, and without a patch, this would be very, very severe. So how to fix? Well, what actually fixed this was openness and collaboration. And so industry collaboration was a silver lining because Red Hat actually made the point that the flaw forced software and hardware developers to talk to each other far more openly and far more deeply than they've ever done before. And so we basically saw them start a process of gradually, being identified, being presented, assessing the probability of exploitation. Intel informs partners and the NDA, and then a huge amount of work getting done to fix it, until finally we all realized that this was quite scary because it would allow for the theft of credentials and cryptographic keys and the infiltration of sensitive data at multiple levels, right? So therefore you needed a multi-level approach to fix this problem because of the difficult nature of hardware-based vulnerabilities. And so security patches were then developed and rushed out. And by the way, they were rushed in 6 months. And in fact, eventually we had to patch the patch. So the security patch that was sent out was found not to be sufficient. So to close out this particular example, community collaboration, folks, is what led to us getting on top of this massive meltdown. And they're just examples of the fact that Spectre and Meltdown, it's 4 years old now, but massive lessons were learned from the way in which you uncover a vulnerability, the way that you communicate it, the way that you work on it, the way that you fix it, the way that you roll out solutions. And it really was very much around creating a closed group of users, fixing it, being very open amongst each other. And imagine if they'd rushed this. Imagine if each of them had worked on it. Imagine if we dealt with these vulnerabilities the way we dealt with COVID, that every company, every supplier of hardware, software, systems, every user tried to solve this problem independently. You would have had the COVID mess that we've got now. And so basically, community collaboration fixed the problem. It wasn't about security at all. So what are some of the imperatives that come out of this? And I want to explore this more with our panel when we talk to them just now. The first is, effectively, security is a common good. It's like community health or climate change. And everyone has a collective responsibility for the security of the internet and all the devices on it, which requires multi-stakeholder, cross-border collaboration. Very difficult thing to pick off. Now, look at those words. Multi-stakeholder, cross-border collaboration is exactly what we needed for COVID, and there was no one that could pull it together. The World Health Organization failed horribly in pulling off multi-stakeholder cross-border collaboration. And so the point is we needed to suspend commercial competition. We needed to suspend politics, personal motivation. And that's the problem. We didn't suspend it with COVID, and increasingly we have to work together. You got to work for the benefit of everyone. And so for me, this is a really interesting conversation, this kind of metaphor between collaborating on security and collaborating on COVID. And the beauty about collaboration, of course, is it is highly scalable and it's easy to adapt as things change. And we're starting to see this now with COVID. As the variant changes, we're starting to see collaboration responding very quickly in a very agile way. So it's a lot like an ecosystem, right? And today, more and more of the world is looking like an ecosystem. What's an ecosystem? Well, you know, ecosystem like a coral reef. It's sustainable because you've got multiple parties living on one platform to the mutual benefit, the ones eating what the other secretes. There's conservation of energy. It's closed loop. It's symbiotic. There might be a few parasites, but maybe you need them. It's very diverse. But everyone's working to keep that ecosystem alive and for the common good until, of course, man arrives. And then and this beautiful ecosystem, this coral reef, is self-managing and self-correcting. And that is the nature of ecosystems. And that's the nature of collaboration, because who's in charge of an ecosystem like a coral reef? Who's in charge? Who's in control? And the answer is no one's in charge. No one's in control. If there's a threat, everything responds automatically. Of course, you can see the problem that we're having right now with a massive loss of coral reefs globally, because the whole system is breaking down because it wasn't able to respond to the impact of humanity. And what's making it worse now, of course, is we're starting to see collaboration. You look at Facebook, you look at Meta, you look at all of these new things that are rolling out, where we're building, you know, apps and integrated apps and super apps. It's all about connecting ecosystems to each other. We're moving from disparate sectors of consumer and company, supplier, competitor, governments, and NGOs operating separately. We're now putting them into a single ecosystem with shared interests and shared platforms. So what's happening in business, in e-commerce, with the tech giants is very much an ecosystem play, which requires trust and it requires collaboration. And of course, when there's a security problem, everyone has to work together in the common interest. Even the US military gets this. In the invite that was sent out, I'm not going to read this quote, but we're really moving from networked, we're moving towards networked organizations and away from siloed organizations. And it's really about transparent information sharing to create what General McChrystal referred to as shared consciousness. We all know the same thing. You've got consensus, you've got common access to information, as well as empowered execution, which is really about being agile. And you're operating as if you're a single entity. Now, this is becoming the norm. In fact, the United States Security Agency, the NSA, the dreaded NSA, gets it. The NSA of the United States of America has a National Security Collaboration Center, which is set up for strategic partnerships and has built this ecosystem. It's exactly what they've done. And so what we're starting to see more and more is ecosystems being adopted, more collaboration, and a greater emphasis on trust. If you look at the Internet Society, which is set up to secure the internet, it's all about a collaborative security approach. It's all about fostering confidence, collective responsibility, you know, making sure that we have the right values, evolving, creating consensus, and thinking globally. And so if you start to distill this and we extract out of this some key learnings, one of the key learnings here, folks, is that security is going to require far more collaboration than we've ever seen in the past. We all have to accept collective responsibility for what's going on. We all have to foster confidence in each other. And we want to make sure that we evolve and we move quickly, we learn rapidly, we think globally, but act locally. And so I want to close out with this final slide, which I love. And if you summarize this entire presentation, and by the way, this is a slide that was a formula that was developed for human relationships, developed by a guy called Charles Green. He called it the trust equation. Collaboration requires trust. The only way that I'm going to collaborate with somebody else is if I trust them. And the only way in which security, we're going to collaborate on security issues is if we trust each other. Now, where does trust come from? And trust comes from three things that make trust stronger and one thing that makes trust weaker. And I'm going to apply this to human relationships, to collaboration, and to the way we responded to COVID, right? So the first element of creating trust with someone else is, are you credible? In other words, what's your experience? What's your track record? What have you done? What qualifications do you have? And do you speak with authority? And we'll talk later on to Sam and to me about this, about how security professionals need to build their own brand and build credibility so people trust you. The second is reliability. When we ask you to do something, do you deliver it consistently? And reliability is, are you solid, right? Do you have Velcro gloves? Do you catch problems and fix them? Are you a closer? Intimacy in this context refers to, are you willing to admit vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and areas for development? And many people, in fact, many relationships break down because people aren't prepared to be vulnerable with each other. And in fact, you look at China just refused to admit vulnerability and the COVID, for examples, and therefore there's huge distrust because of that. And then finally, so if you are credible, reliable, and you're willing to admit vulnerability, you'll build trust. What reduces trust is self-orientation. In other words, selfishness, self-interest. If we act towards our own personal goals only, we detract from trust. And when you apply this to personal relationships, this is going to work well in your marriage, with friends, and with your professional colleagues when you work with them. Had we done this for COVID, for example, you wouldn't have had this problem we've had. We would have trusted people who were credible. In fact, we undermined them. We would have demonstrated success, and we would have admitted vulnerability, and we would have acted less around national interest and more around global interest. We didn't do any of these things. And so what happened is trust was destroyed during COVID. Now you look at security and how we're going to have to work together in the future. It's very clear that we're going to have to rely very heavily on this equation going forward. So folks, that's my share for the day. And now you didn't come here to listen to me. And now I'm going to welcome Sam and Itumeleng onto the call. So refreshing to have two ladies with me. Wonderful. I'm thrilled with this. And I hope you enjoy the presentation. And so welcome to both of you. A real pleasure to have both of you. It's such a breath of fresh air in chatting to you both prior to this call. Let's dive straight into this. Sam, if I can start with you. Sam, the security community has historically been very, very silo-based, and it's not renowned for collaboration. So why did the industry collaborate so well on the Spectre and the Meltdown threat, in your view?
Yeah, so thanks for that, Herman. I mean, no, definitely, when it comes to collaboration, I think it's definitely, in the past, the industry has been a lot more siloed. I think now we've seen the value in sharing, so the collaboration, but where we're seeing it probably a lot more is across sort of threat intelligence. Why I think it worked well to address Spectre and Meltdown is probably more because there wasn't security companies. So there wasn't a financial gain. It wasn't a cutting edge. It was about, it affected everybody. It was the processor rather than the various software. So it was in everyone's interest to work together to resolve it so that, they could basically continue. I think still, where we probably need to work a little bit more on around the collaboration is probably around data breaches. I think there people, and that obviously talks to your trust formula, which you had up just earlier, and that talks around the intimacy or the vulnerability. So obviously within the cyber or information security spectrum, we're very nervous to sort of put ourselves out there, be vulnerable, and obviously open up around sort of data breaches, because you see it as a reflection, not as a reputation for your organization, but obviously as a professional within the industry, wanting to make sure that it didn't happen on your watch. So I mean, it is a great, the trustworthiness formula that you showed is great, and it's something that in the I think especially in the cybersecurity fraternity, we should be working towards building more on the credibility, the reliability, the intimacy, and a little bit less around the selfishness.
Sam, you know what? I'm going to work with you. We're going to create a security industry version of this formula. Because I must say, I picked this formula like 2 or 3 days ago and added it to the deck. Thank you. Thanks, Sam. I'm spot on with you. And you're absolutely right, right? I sit on the board of a number of listed companies. You know what keeps me awake at night is that we used to call it the Sunday Times test. I'm not sure what we call it these days. Nobody reads the Sunday Times. But the Sunday Times test was always what happens if there's a breach and suddenly I have to appear and it's announced. And I must tell you that in my career, that's happened a few times. Great comments from Sam there. Thank you, Sam. Itumeleng, welcome. If I can ask you a question, do you think there's a broader need for improved collaboration between private and public sectors. I mean, we've seen, Transnet go down. My daughter's a lawyer. She's telling me that the Justice Department's been hacked. The deeds office is offline. The courts are not working. What's your sense here?
Thanks, Prof. And thanks for the opportunity to have this very critical conversation for our industry. And for you just simplifying the topic around collaboration and the basic things that you would apply to any topic or issue that needs to be resolved that requires a lot of people to come together in solving it. And now just talking about the broader view and where we are and how collaboration can help between private and public sectors in solving this problem. We've really seen that in South Africa, there's been a huge increase in the last 20 months in targeted threats that are coming into our environments. As you just said, public sector being hacked. Are they really ready to respond to this? I think from a resourcing and capacity perspective, it's where the public sector might be struggling with how to solve. They might know what to do. They might have the right intent. They might not have the right skills in terms of resolving it. We're not going to wait for that capacity to be built within the public sector. That's where the private sector needs to come in and bring in the right skills. Like you said, it's for the common good. We're all interested in ensuring that we're resolving what needs to be resolved. So I really think that's something that we need to be looking at and ensuring that from a private and public sector perspective, we're able to collaborate. And with the remote working and the increased use of e-commerce due to lockdowns, we're seeing a huge take up on people doing things online, shopping online. We're seeing retailers are going online, your ShopRite, Pick n Pay, Woolworths, everyone has gone online. With that, it means the attack surface has increased. It means bad actors are now seeing more and more opportunities that they need to attack. How do we then stay ahead of the curve and ensure that we've got the right thinking, the right strategies to be able to cooperate and work towards a solution that can resolve all of that? So I really think, like you said, trust is critical. It is a license to operate. I'm not going to do business with a company that I do not trust. I need to ensure that if I share my data with you, if I share my banking information with you, etc., you're going to protect it, and that's a given. So if you do not have that, I cannot do business with you, and that's the bottom line. So it becomes very important that there's a collaborative way in which we approach this.
I love that comment. I love your reference to license to operate. I work with a number of mining companies, and they use the term social license to operate. They said, every day you've got to earn the license to be in existence. And I know Sim Shabalala's made that point a number of times at Standard Bank. I've often heard him use this comment of social license to operate. People trust us. Just as an example, we had a credit bureau get hacked in South Africa, and every bank in South Africa lost data, including all the telcos, all because one company got hacked and happened to have access to data in all the companies. Great. And I'm not even sure if that company's going to last after this, because they may have lost their social license to operate after that particular hack. Great comment there. So folks, I want to go to each of you, and to me, while I'm talking to you, can you give me, just from each of you, a kind of personal question? And I don't need you to disclose anything that's privileged information, but maybe speaking in general terms, could you give us an example of how collaboration has been helpful to your company and your career, and in a particular task that you've had to work on? Tumi, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can do that. I think the one challenge that we see in the information security space is really the shortage of skills. As much as we might have these big plans and strategies to get things done, we sometimes just struggle getting the right skills to be able to execute those strategies or plans that we've got in place. One example that I can share is where we were implementing quite a huge project within the bank around identities and digital identities more broadly. And from a design and architecture perspective, the team understood what needed to be done. But there was another player in the market that had done it before us, and they've gone through it, they had the lessons learned, and they have built, the understanding of how that solution would work across a financial services institution. Collaboration came quite handy in really resolving a lot of the issues where this other player was able to provide some of their skilled professionals, give us an hour or two. It doesn't have to be contractual. Get people around the table and we talk about what the challenges are and what it is that we're trying to solve. It really helped us a lot. that we didn't have to go internationally to look for the skills, but we're able to, just based on having the right forums where we talk about what we're working on, what are some of the challenges, we're able to get access to right skills and the right knowledge and coaching for our teams to be able to resolve some of the challenges. That's really, really the power of collaboration coming into play.
Wonderful, wonderful. You know, it reminds me of the way that farmers work with each other in this country. You know, your farm might be on fire today, and then all the farmers arrive to help you, and then tomorrow somebody else's farm's on fire, and then everybody's coming there to help you. So I love that example that you've given. Great stuff. Samantha, your views. I mean, you must have had this happen a few times in your career, I'm sure.
So definitely, probably more on the operational side, I think, where the collaboration comes in very helpful, especially, and that's not only just for the financial services. I mean, I think across the information and cybersecurity industry, and also globally, is just around sort of threat intelligence feeds. So where, you know, people are seeing potentially, you know, known phishing domains or malicious IPs, and they're sharing it. You know, you might have set up with some people across industries, you know, some WhatsApp group, Telegram groups, etc., and basically sharing that information, because it doesn't put your organization at risk by sharing that information, because it's really just the source of the malicious, you know, IP or domain. And basically it assists us in being able to be a little bit more proactive rather than reactive. I think that's more on the operational side. And then I think more where I've seen it work really well is, again, working groups. So similar to what Itumeleng said, where you have sort of working groups, especially when there's changes in regulation. So there's a number of organizations that are impacted with the change of regulations, or something like PAPIA, for example, where you can come together and you can freely discuss what are we doing to address it. You know, what can we do as an industry? And obviously then it means that not each single organization is going out and sort of trying to reinvent the wheel. So that's where definitely there's been some good value and good sort of sharing of knowledge.
Got it. Okay, and so thank you, thank you to both of you for sharing, I guess, what's and adding rich color from your own personal experience as to how collaboration has helped you in the past. Sam, if I can just stay with you, and folks on the call, please could you also keep loading your questions. I've got 3 questions loaded. I'm going to start using some of them with our panel shortly. So please keep loading your questions. Sam, what organizations exist to facilitate collaboration on security issues in this country?
So, I mean, I've been in the financial services industry now for a good long time. So I think I will be able to talk through that lens. So on the financial services, you've obviously got the sort of the fabric where there's, you know, the banks and the sort of asset managers and people like that, that's coming together, again, sharing that knowledge, also working together to sort of help define and sort of, especially in the cybersecurity where we've touched on sort of skills needed, etc. So start to help to define types of roles and what's needed to fulfill those roles. And then there's also more in the investment and asset management business. There's a CISO where there's a lot of the asset managers that sort of sit together, again, sharing information, you know, trying to see if there's any trends, what we can do together to address it, because this is, like you mentioned earlier, security is like public health, or, you know, it's for the greater good. And yeah, so I mean, besides that, and then obviously we still a large portion, and Itumeleng sort of was starting to touch on a little bit, or just starting to ring some bells, where we spoke about, you know, the threat landscape is increasing because we're getting more and more, not just within our organizations or the public or private sector, you've also got your end users. So people are getting more onto their mobile phones. So what are we doing around sort of that? And that sort of triggers the cyber hub, because the cyber hub is, you know, from a South African aspect, I mean, that's supposed to be where people go to, where they can report, you know, sort of incidents that happen, or, you know, where they should be doing a little bit more to maybe help the general public out there. Because, I mean, and that's why I also think what's driving the attacks in South Africa and Africa is because we have this big population of individuals that are starting to come online.
Mm-hmm.
Right, very, very good. Absolutely, I think that's spot on. And you know, you're just describing such a powerful cocktail of we're using the internet more, people who are unsophisticated getting onto the internet, companies are not ready, public-private challenges, infrastructure may be vulnerable, we're not collaborating enough. which kind of says there's a big need for new skills here. So Itumeleng, if I can move over to you now, and what are the views on the skills available to the field and the skill sets needed to succeed here? Because I think that's such a key point, right? You need people who can work in this very technical space. Itumeleng?
Yeah. So when you talk about skills, I think from a cybersecurity perspective, it is a challenge globally. Governments, public sector, there are big plans to go digital. We talk about every business being a digital business. But if you have a digital strategy in your business, it has to be underpinned by a security strategy. And if you take an example of a smart city, I mean, we hear our government talking about building smart cities. The first question as a security professional that I'm going to ask is, how are we going to secure this? Because then there are a whole lot of other new risks that will emerge just by having everything connected. So it really means that we need to be building the right skills in our country to be able to solve all of this. If we are going to go look at our traditional computer science or information security type of qualifications to source all of these skills, we're definitely not going to win this fight. So we need to be thinking about this differently and looking at what profiles would be good as security professionals. What kind of person would be able to be a good threat hunter? What kind of thinking do you need to have? So we shouldn't have a checklist of things that you need to look at. You could be coming from any background, but if you have the passion for security, if you have the right curiosity, you're able to build a successful career within information security. So we need a strong pipeline coming in from universities, new joiners, interns that can come into this environment and be trained on how to run a security function or to protect data in the systems and how everything fits in together. That's really what we need to be looking at, because there's a huge gap. And we're seeing a huge migration of skills where people are leaving our country to go and work in other parts of the continent and even abroad. So how do we then ensure that we've got a continuous pipeline, we're training the right people? So there needs to be a different way of thinking from a university level perspective to ensure that we've got the right feed coming into the security space. But it is really a huge challenge for us trying to resolve that.
Excellent, great points. And I like your comment about the fact that you have to really manage the resources in your own team. And I guess, Itumeleng, that's kind of why you need that external network, right? Because you're never going to be fully resourced internally. You better have access to that resource externally. Lusungu's loaded a very provocative question. I've been mulling this thing over and trying to decide when to slip this into the conversation. He asks such a good question, and thank you, Lusungu. And please, folks, please keep loading questions. He says, with the trust equation that I present, this is how do you look at the zero trust security model that's being encouraged by security researchers? Itumeleng, that's a tough question. Here I'm saying collaborate and trust, and Lusungu is saying, but experts are saying zero trust. Is there a conflict here, or do these two things coexist?
Yeah, that's an interesting one and very controversial, like you said. We are saying apply a zero trust principle where you continuously validate. If I trust who you are today, if I trust that you are who you say you are today, connecting into my network, tomorrow I'll need to check again and ensure that I'm protecting my business.
Yeah.
So okay. Definitely very critical that you ensure that from a zero trust perspective, you're trusting what can be trusted. So you need to validate, because bad actors are continuously going to challenge your models, are going to challenge your systems, but you need to have a way in which you can continuously validate that you are engaging the right people. So it doesn't mean if I've validated you once, therefore our trust is now fixed. Therefore, it's a continuous process of validating our trust.
Okay, cool. And so Sam, your thoughts on zero trust versus collective trust?
No, I mean, it is interesting because obviously from a zero trust, it really is, we don't trust you, you need to prove it, which I suppose again is I suppose the model, the trustworthiness formula talks more to sort of the individual versus the, how do we as a community collaborate? And I suppose the zero trust side is, as Itumeleng said, is more around sort of your validating that it's you to a device to authenticate. I think the one is definitely more people focused, and the other one is more around access to sort of the data. But I suppose, yeah, I mean, it's to get to that trustworthiness, over time, you have to build the trust.
Yeah. And that's so basically what we're saying is you can actually balance off. Zero trust talks to the way that you design, architect, build, and manage the technical infrastructure. And really what we are talking about in the trust equation is communication between people and how we collaborate in terms of thinking about the issue. So these things are not incompatible. So Sam, while I've got you on screen, is cybersecurity a competitive environment for targeted firms? Or do you think this is something that actually doesn't need to be? Or is there some area where it can be?
So definitely, I mean, I think if we stick with the theme around collaboration, so collaboration is, it's for the greater good, and it's definitely needed. I think where the competitive edge comes in is obviously more on your endpoint solutions. So, how are some of the technologies that we would potentially look at to procure to help us address sort of various threats, that is where the cutting edge comes in. So how are they able to easily be able to detect sort of new types of threats? That's where the cutting edge comes in, rather than sort of the collaboration around your threat intelligence. So what are we seeing out there, the types of phishing domains, the abuse sort of domains, IPs, etc. I don't think that's where the cutting edge comes in. The cutting edge is more on the inside, once those organizations have been able to develop the quick AI, the machine learning, etc., to be able to better protect when it's inside.
Got it. Yeah, and so the point you're making, I guess, is there's some areas where collaboration is easier than others. And again, it comes back to that trust equation, right, around intimacy. There's some areas where you're willing to share and some areas, you're open to share. Often when I talk to people about how to build platforms and platform economies, I often say that you want to trust, but you don't want to trust completely. You cannot trust, but not too much. You want to share, but not too much. Great comment there. To me, it's becoming clear that we really are going to have to be aligned to the latest global best practice. In your sense, are we there? Is South Africa really aligned to global best practice, or do you feel that we're lagging in some way in this country?
I really think we are aligned to global best practice. If you look at the ISO standards, if you look at the NIST standards, we are there with the best in the world. If you look at our financial services businesses, we usually get a lot of awards on executing very innovative security solutions in the industry. But we still have a lot of challenges, mainly just around skills, and also going back to the question around culture. Just the culture in our region from an education perspective. Have people been trained? Do they have the right awareness around security? And how do they engage with technology? And do they understand what their role is when they're using technology? I think that's where maybe from an end user or a direct user of technology perspective, we need to spend more time on just culturally making people aware that as much as you're going digital, you also have a responsibility in ensuring that when you're using these technologies, you're keeping yourself safe. Then from a skill perspective, as I've touched on earlier, we need to continuously be building the right skills. We need to ensure that we get our teams exposed to global training, global exposure, so that they're able to then execute against all of these best practices.
And I've got two really great questions here, Itumeleng, if I can maybe pass one to you. What is considered best practice, and how is it measured? What a great question. Thank you, Henry.
Yeah, I guess it depends. What might be best practice today might change. The security world is continuously changing and shifting. And we know that bad actors are continuously innovating as well. So they're not sitting still. So what might look good today might not look good tomorrow. But there needs to be some level of standard, I guess, just based on understanding the industry and history, and just, I guess, looking at different ways that have been studied by, I guess, academics in this space. And what are some of the things that you need to have as minimum in your environment to be able to secure yourself? I guess you start with the foundation. If your foundation based on your NIST standards and your ISO standards is there, then you can start thinking about what is the bad actor thinking about today, and how do I respond to that from a more proactive perspective? So I wouldn't say a standard gives you 100% coverage, but it really gives you a good, solid foundation that you don't have to be dealing with the smaller things. Then you can be after the bigger things that bad actors might be thinking about.
Perfect. Great. Thank you for that. And I see Ian van Rensburg's joined. Hi, Ian. His question was, how do you overcome the shortage of experienced security engineers leaving the country? But I think you've answered that question, Itumeleng, in your earlier comments. Folks, please keep loading questions. I'm really looking forward to dealing with your specific question as we go forward. Sam, if I can maybe turn to you now. What's your sense when we do collaborate on security matters? Do you think we are more reactive or are we more proactive? Are we kind of collaborating to build a capability to solve future problems, or are we collaborating because something horrible has just happened and we're trying to fix it now? What's your sense of the way in which we work together?
So I think it just depends on the angle. So for example, the reactiveness, I would say, is probably focused more around, I think, you know, something happens, somebody notices a new threat actor or new sort of malicious domain, etc., and they sort of block against it, and they share that information back with, you know, the other organizations within their sort of sphere of trust. I think where to sort of bring in the proactiveness, I think that's where Itumeleng has been speaking about. So some of the things that we're doing more, because we know it's about looking forward. So what do we need to do to ensure that we are better protected for the threats, you know, that we face in the future? So how do we build that defender, that supply chain of the new defenders, the skills, bringing the skills through? And I think that's where there's some really good collaboration, and that's more the proactiveness, because you're wanting to build it for the future. I think, you know, when it comes to defending, unfortunately, a lot of the time it is more reactive than proactive. So that's why I say it sort of depends on what we're facing.
Thank you. I think that's quite clear. Paul, I've got a question for you from Ian. Ian's question is, how does a company like Splunk retain their experienced staff?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge. I mean, there was a spec out for some Splunk skills from a global car company, and you know, I think they touched everybody in the market at Splunk on their CV. So there's a massive demand. I think it's a massively interesting industry to get into. So we do have a number of programs, you know, educational programs, and we do a lot of upliftment. Clearly, the appetite for it is massive. There's a number of upliftment programs, the Splunk for Rookies, Splunk for Ninjas. We've got our pre-sales teams that we use. But I think this is like taking a teaspoon and trying to fill a bucket, you know?
Yeah.
There's just an endless demand. And the only thing I think that we struggle with is that we see the conveyor belt, which Itumeleng alluded to, of skills in the country. You know, we like a feeder to economies. And when I was overseas now recently, I also did my first trip in 2 years, and the people in France and Italy and Spain were complaining about exactly the same thing. So we're not alone. We're just, as South Africa, I think we have some really good skills, and we're a net exporter of talent at the moment, and it's a bit of a tragic situation. So I don't really know what the end zone is, but it's tough to continually train. And I think this is the reluctance about large institutions. You know, how do they hold on to the talent? We can upskill, but I think we've got to work out a way to hold on to the talent.
Yeah, great comment. And you know, and today I think I always say what you want to do is spend rands but earn dollars. And I think the future for me is actually people living in South Africa and working offshore online. I'll be honest. I think anyone who emigrates, if you emigrate, you're going to end up paying dollars and earning dollars. Why would you want to do that in a country where you only have 4 hours of sunshine a year? You know, I mean, come on, guys. SA rules and rocks. You know, we can't have a panel with 2 ladies on it without talking about diversity in IT and STEM. We got to talk about this. Firstly, just a broader question to both of you. Firstly, how important is diversity, right, in this space? You know, there is a risk, right? You're solving really complex problems. You can't have everyone thinking the same. So how important is just general diversity, skills, background, thinking? And then I'd really appreciate it if you'd maybe just share some of the challenges you experienced. You know, you're both women in a very male-dominated society. Some of the numbers I've seen are horrific. Only 24% of professional security staff are women. And what have been some of your challenges? So maybe Itumeleng, I've got you on screen. Maybe you want to just start talking about the diversity question first. How important is diversity?
diversity in the cybersecurity space is really, really critical, because what you really want to do is to bring in a team of people that will be able to think in different ways in approaching a problem, because the type of problems that you deal with are different every day. You don't want to have a team of people that think in the same way and are going to agree on everything. So very critical, and I've seen it work in my teams where I've got people that bring in different strengths, different ways of thinking, different approaches in how they solve problems. And that is what's going to move us forward. If we're all going to come together and think in the same way, chances are we're going to miss a lot of things. So there's really value in just bringing different people from different backgrounds. Hence, in my comment earlier, I said there isn't a profile that you can say this is a cybersecurity professional that will be successful. It could be anyone from anywhere. I've seen people come from agriculture, people that have started business end up in security, people that come from education or teaching end up in security, and they become very successful in this space. It's about how you approach problems and how you solve going forward.
I like that. That's great. Yeah, and your reflection on the gender challenges.
It's massive. I guess it's one of those where we really every day trying to figure out how do we keep women in cybersecurity. I know there are challenges around cybersecurity. It is really a 24/7 job, because it can happen at any time. You don't have fixed hours where you say I'll start at 9 and finish at 4. What I see as a trend, I find that when women get to an age where they're starting families or priorities change in their lives, they choose to leave the industry. So you might have a huge pipeline of women coming in at entry level, but as they get more experience or circumstances change in their lives, they choose not to stay in cybersecurity because of possibly the perceived number of hours and the commitment required from that perspective. So organizations really need to think about how do we create an environment that allows both things to happen. If I'm a young woman now starting a family, how do I still have a good, comfortable career within cybersecurity while doing that, without having to choose? It's really a challenge that I've seen, and we still scratching our heads, figuring out how do we make this happen with creating the right environment. But I really think with the remote working or working from home, it has created a bit of space for that to happen. Because as a woman sitting at home with a young child, I'm able to still look after my family, look after my child, and still do what needs to be done from a work perspective. Still a long way to go, but there's progress that's being made in that space.
Fantastic. I love your comment. I think you are right. In a very perverse way, COVID's been a boon for many things. One of them being the ability to work from home, and that's helped women a lot as well. Sam, your sense around diversity. I just got to tell you a story quickly. I started a company once in Standard Bank when I was there, and we called it Beyond Payments, and it was really weird because I had all these technical people and specialist people and PR people and naming people to come up with a name for the business. And you know who came up with the name for the business was my PA. She came up with the name for the business. Isn't that amazing? You know, and here we are. And then this lady, I mean, him was actually making the point that my PA came up with the name. And I'm like, wow, talk about diversity rocks. Hey. Sam, your thoughts?
No, 100%. I mean, I echo everything Itumeleng has said. I mean, definitely for me, the more diverse my team, the better. I think, you know, the threats just keep changing. The threat landscape. So coming in with a different way of thinking will definitely help solve the problems. Think about trying to be proactive, because, you know, there's sometimes there's been other problems in different agriculture or something like that that's been solved, and using something from that is able to address the problem that we're facing within the cybersecurity industry. I think where diversity also, and I mean, you are correct. I mean, I think there has been a slight change in the number of women globally in the cybersecurity workforce. I think if we go back, I think as far as 2011 or 2015, I think we were only about 11%. So we've definitely, over the last sort of few years, it's definitely increased, which is fantastic. Obviously, you know, we still got a long way to go to get younger women and girls into STEM, and to show, you know, that it doesn't matter that if it is a 24/7 job, because cybersecurity never switches off, that you still have a place or a part to play within it. And also, I suppose, looking at the organizations, you know, they need to make make some possibilities available to women who later, while already in their career, now it's time for them to start families, that they can come back, with flexibility and things like that. And then I also think what's important around to attract and to keep increasing our numbers is, is having other. So you want to have other women and women participate in something like this today, so that other women and young girls can have someone to look to, because it isn't great being a woman wanting to enter the industry and basically the only thing within, and especially in the past in conferences, there have been very few women sort of speakers. They have been mostly male, because it has been a male-dominated industry. So it's great to have more women involved in sort of doing presentations, etc., so that women that want to get into the industry can have people to look up to.
Yeah, lovely answers, ladies. Thank you. And thank you, because I think you give us all hope in that space, and we've got a lot of work to do. And men, we have hope as well. This is our job to fix too. We can't just sit back and say it's somebody else's problem. Folks, in closing, you both may have made such compelling cases, I think, for uplifting skills, reaching out, building networks, having partnerships. So my question to you, how do you build this trusted network? What's the advice that you can give to everyone on this call? How do you decide who to trust? Itumeleng, do you want to kick us off here? How do you decide, where do you start? Where do you start with building this trusted network? And how do you decide who to include and not include in that circle?
Yeah. Very important to have a clear plan on what it is that you want to achieve with that network that you're planning into. So joining forums like your CISO forums, where you have people that are doing similar work or like-minded individuals that have the same interests from a career perspective, is a good starting point. I would also say environments or tools like LinkedIn play quite a key role in just plugging you into those networks, so that you're able to know when events are happening, understanding topics that are in the industry. Just register and join in and have a conversation with other industry professionals and hear how they approaching it. So I would say being more deliberate in reaching out to people. Yes, it is challenging now in a virtual working environment where you can't just go to a conference and meet people. You have to do it online. But if you have a clear plan and you're willing to reach out to other professionals, you find that people are open and willing to share their knowledge and their experiences. And that will go a long way in actually helping you build your network and have people to reach out to when you have challenges later.
Great advice. Thank you. And I have to say, Itumeleng, your comment on LinkedIn is amazing. I started on LinkedIn, I think 10 years ago. I got 40,000 followers, and I always say to people, I've got 40,000 people helping me think. Do you know how cool that is? And they all want to see me succeed, and I help them, and they help me, and nobody pays anyone. It is awesome. Sam, your sense in this space, what advice can we give here? It's such a challenge.
100%. So, I mean, I think definitely LinkedIn has added a lot. It gives us a platform. I think you can, you can put various search terms in. You can find, sort of individuals that you maybe have something in common with. So, if you're looking for somebody, I don't know, that's maybe got more networking, security experience, and you could put that in and, scroll through individuals and find people that sort of it resonates with you, people that, you maybe have something in common with. And reach out to them. I think also, deliberately building your brand. So going out and deliberately, as you said, it's sometimes uncomfortable reaching out to someone to say, can I join your network, or, something like that, but putting yourself out there. And I think that's a big thing these days, is that you need to, look for opportunities to join forums or to join groups. And even, I think, even some of the ISACA events you can go to, in South Africa, I've seen those quite a bit. Obviously, they've been a bit virtual at the moment, but I mean, that's normally quite a good place. And I think IC Squared, which is more on the, they haven't had a heck of a lot of things in South Africa over the last sort of year or so. But again, there are online sort of forums that you can join. And hopefully now with things opening up a little bit, you can maybe go, because it is easier to network in person. When it's online, you have to sort of go out there to actively build.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sam. And folks, so there you have it, folks. Two really esteemed, very trusted, and very credible individuals in the industry have shared with you, I guess, some astonishing insights, amazing insights, very rich discussion. Thanks to Itumeleng and thanks to Sam. I just want to say, you know, I put that formula up. I have to tell the two of you, you guys score incredibly highly on this form, right? Because you both come across as such credible individuals with your experience and your skills and your background. You know, you've been reliable, you've built fantastic careers, and, you know, and you've earned the social license to operate. You've exposed vulnerabilities, and you've shared with us where you think weaknesses are and where we need to work. And, you know, you've shared so generously, and it wasn't a self-interest issue. So I want to thank you for living the brand that we are trying to sell here today. Thank you so much to both of you. It's been fantastic. Thank you to the sponsors Splunk, and thank you to everyone for attending. And we'll be having a 4th session in January, and I'm sure the organizers will get you all that information shortly. Folks, thank you so much for joining. Fantastic. Paul, thank you for sponsoring and being online as well. And to Itumeleng and Splunk, and to Sam, thank you. And to everyone on the call, folks, have an awesome year end. Have an awesome Christmas and year end if you guys celebrate that. And enjoy, be safe, be well, and travel safely. We'll see you all in the new year. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.